Hey, welcome everybody. Make yourselves comfortable. We're going to start in a couple of minutes, probably about 2 or 3 minutes after the normal start time. So maybe 2:42, 2:43, something like this. I just want to give people a chance to arrive. Okay, everybody. Good afternoon. I propose we get started since we are a couple of minutes past the official start time. So welcome to this second session on the topic of case interviews. We had our first session, I think, about 3 weeks ago or so, which was suddenly, as you might remember, both last session and this session were suddenly shifted to online just because of a medical condition that is impairing my mobility. However, just good news. I have started treatment. Things are working, so I will be able to do the third session in person. But I think that will be in January, February, in February, if I recall correctly. But anyway, so today we're online. I guess most of you are probably home. So we're going to run until 5:50. We're going to have one break in the middle. So the topic of today, or let's say last time, right? But we basically did an introduction to case interviews. So the main thing that we did is we worked through a whole case, through all 4 stages of a case, and you did exercises for each stage of the case, and I showed you methods that you could use for each of those methods of the case. Today, what we're going to do is we're going to focus on the topic of structure. Structure is like the mother of all skills when it comes down to case interviews, and I would even say when it comes down to business problem solving in general. It really is the most important skill, but it's also the hardest skill to crack. So today we're going to cover both the content of structure and problem solving, but we're also going to look at structure in communication. They actually really complement each other very well. And that's why we're going to do that. So if I were to put it in the context of the case, Essentially, remember, these are the 4 stages of the case that we talked about last time. We're going to be focusing on this bit, on the second bit, but bear in mind that the stronger you become at this, the stronger you will also be at math type questions, as well as brainstorming or creativity questions, okay? Because both of them require you to structure before you start executing. So to kick things off, what I propose to do is that we actually watch a short set of videos that Bain and company put together a few years ago. I think they're very useful and interesting videos, and we'll use them a couple times as reference during the session. Basically, what we see in these videos is we see 3 different candidates who are presenting their structure to tackle the same problem. And the problem is written here on the slide, which is basically there's you imagine a manufacturer, an electronics manufacturer, who is anticipating the onset of 3D TV. And what they're wondering is if they should develop a 3D TV that requires glasses or one that doesn't. And I'm sure you can already start to imagine the kinds of trade-offs that are involved in a decision like this. So let's watch the 3 videos, and then I will provide some brief introductory comments on what you will have just seen.
Do you mind if I take a few seconds to think about it?
Sure.
As you mentioned, we have 3 options to choose from here. I think I would want to understand, it's almost a what do you have to believe question. There's a couple of things that I want to look at, and I think you need to think about which option is going to be sort of the best in this what do you have to believe question. Right. So the first thing is just investment. You'd mentioned that each option sort of has different investment criteria. So I'd really want to understand, which of the options actually has the highest ROI and return on investment. Okay. The second, I think, is looking at the competitive marketplace. And I'd really want to understand sort of how the competitors are going to react and which of the options might have the best sort of competitive reaction for my business. Okay. The third, I think, that I'd want to look at is my existing business. Okay. So, which of the 3 options are going to sort of create the least cannibalization on my existing sort of non-3D market. Okay. And then the last, I think, another important thing to look at is just execution. So are we going to be able to execute on this as a company, and which of the options has sort of the least execution risk? Do you mind if I take a second just to think about this?
Sure.
So if I were to think about this, there are 3 different buckets that I'd want to consider. Okay. So that would first be looking at the revenues, second, the investment and costs upfront, okay, and then third, comparing those to the status quo. So within each of those, on the revenue side, you mentioned that we'll have a different profitability depending upon if we go with the glasses option or the no glasses. Yes. The price point will be different, and we'll need to think through how that impacts the business. Okay, good. Second, in terms of costs, you also mentioned that it would actually require a different amount of investment on our end. Yes, to develop the 2 different types of products. Yes. So we'll want to figure out what the actual amount of investment is and how that compares with profitability. Okay. Finally, once we have those 2 pieces for the no glasses and glasses options, we'll want to compare that to the status quo. So what are we actually doing today, and how do our economics look today?
Well, in order to sort of believe which is the right way to head, I'd look at 4 different things. So the first thing I would look at is customers. How are my customers going to accept this new product? Yes. I'd have to imagine that someone would prefer to watch TV without the glasses. But, there's a little bit more of doing some research and seeing what our customers are really thinking there. The second thing I would look at is what are my competitors going to do? How easy is it going to be for them to go to market? What are they going to be thinking about pricing? I think there's a lot of interesting information that could be seen there. Okay. Third, I think about cost implications, obviously, sort of how are we going to have to change what materials we're sourcing? What are the R&D costs going to be? Okay. How, just sort of looking at those topics in more details. Good. And then the fourth thing I would think about is kind of how is this fitting in with my current capabilities? How can I use the processes I already have in place to make this? How is it going to affect my current products that I'm offering. So those are the four things I would look at.
All right. So if you thought that, these three candidates had very different approaches to how to structure this problem, I totally agree. If you found it a little bit difficult to make sense of who has a better structure and so on, I'm not surprised. But the idea is that, what I'm hoping for is that, like, by the end of today's session, that you're actually able to critique in very precise detail what each of these women does well in her structure, both on the thinking and the communication, but also where there's opportunities to improve in their thinking and their communication. Because if you can do that with the videos, you can do it with the people with whom you practice, and ultimately you can do it to yourself. You can become kind of like your own coach, right? So that's in a sense what I'm hoping to bring you in terms of kind of capability today. More broadly, I would try to frame it like this. You might have heard from a lot of people on the blogosphere, right, that like you need to learn frameworks. But the truth is that when you're interviewing with the top firms, they don't want you to learn frameworks and they don't want you to regurgitate frameworks, right? And in fact, the best people on the blogosphere, for example, the guys at Crafting Cases and others, they're not telling you to memorize frameworks at all. What they're actually telling you is that you need to learn to build your own frameworks, right? Because when you learn to build your own frameworks that are tailored to each individual case, this is when you actually become an independent thinker, yeah? And when you become an independent thinker, you just basically, you become a better business problem solver. And of course, you're going to become better at case interviews, right? So the whole idea of learning frameworks by heart, I think, is a terrible idea. It's an idea that is pushed by people who really don't know what they're talking about. It's also an idea that is, how to put this? Sometimes people think that the true experts are saying that when in fact they're not saying that, right? It's just sometimes the nuance can be a bit difficult to grasp. So in today's session, I'm going to show you how to build your own tailored frameworks, which means I'm not going to show you frameworks. I'm going to show you ways to think. Okay, it's going to be pretty dense, it's going to be a lot for you to absorb. Don't worry if you feel like it's too much. Don't worry if you feel like you don't remember it all by the end of the session. There's no way you can remember it all, but you will have the slides, you will have the recording. And my recommendation is, if you actually want to start mastering this stuff, is that you take it one bit at a time and then start familiarizing yourself with that one bit by practicing through it, by thinking through it, reflecting on it, right? And then you move on to the next bit, and then the next bit, and so on and so forth. And if you do that, you can get to a place where you master all the bits that I'm going to show you. But it's going to take time, it's going to take effort. There are no shortcuts here, right? There really are no shortcuts. But the reward is also not a fleeting reward. It's actually it's fundamentally about getting to a place where you are fundamentally in a different dimension about, or the quality of your problem solving reaches an other dimension. Yeah. So what we're going to do, so by the way, we're going to have a number several exercises and moments of discussion. So please participate. I think the richness of today's learning will come in part from whether you participate or not, whether you speak up, right? And also contribute in the chat box and so on. But if everybody stays quiet and doesn't participate and is only a spectator, then today's session is going to have less effect and it's going to feel very slow. So please participate, okay? It just makes it a lot more fun. All right, so what we're going to do today, we're going to start with communication, because it's kind of an easy way to get into the subject matter. Then we're going to kind of refresh what we already covered last time on the topic of a structure. So in other words, we're going to review, what do we mean by a structure, and how do we know if we have a good structure? And we're going to go into a little bit more detail on what makes a good structure. Okay, so that's going to be the foundation. And after that, I'm going to bring you the truly new content. And the new content is going to be techniques to tackle different kinds of problems. And basically, in case interviews, 99.5%, 99.7% of case interviews cover two types of questions, two types of problems. And these two types of problems, by the way, represent about 90% of business problems out there. So we're gonna focus on these two types of problems. One of those types of problems is the how-to questions. So I'm going to show you a bunch of techniques for that. I'm also going to show you techniques that work specifically for how-to questions that are of a quantitative nature. When they're quantitative, there's basically extra techniques that you can use. And then lastly, I'm going to show you techniques for what's called options questions. And these are thankfully really easy, actually remarkably easy to think through. And then we will wrap it up. So let's start with communication. And since we're going to start with communication, I actually would love to start communicating with you now. I'd love to hear your thoughts, again, out loud or in the chat box, on the following very simple question, which is, why should we care about how we communicate? So try to imagine, in a case interview, or let's say maybe even more generally when we are, let's say, in a team setting with clients, or maybe just a team and in a room, right? And we're trying to problem solve. Why should we care about how we communicate? Why is good communication important? Any thoughts? So that the interviewer can understand our logic and steps. For example, math structure. Yes, present our arguments convincingly. Allow others to follow your arguments. Very good, right? Very good. So basically, a good structure makes it easy to follow. Very good. It can better show our personality. Good. To have a strong impact. Good. Because the interviewer wants to see our thinking process. Very good. By the way, great contributions and communication here. So I'm super happy to see that level of engagement. So yes. So basically, yes, it builds trust and prevents confusion as well. Very good, right? So in short, if you're thinking great, but you can't communicate well, nobody can benefit from the quality of your thinking except yourself, right? So it really is a glue to foster collaboration, and it's essential for people to appreciate the quality of your thinking so that they understand it, etc. So let me ask you now the following question. If you think about oral communication, and I'm not talking about written, I'm not talking about body language, just purely what we say and how we say it. What might be some examples of poor communication? Now, think in a case interview, that's what we're doing, right? We're communicating orally by and large. So what might be some examples of poor communication? Unstructured, yes. Not structured, yes. So kind of all over the place, right? Speaking too fast and not taking pauses, good. Listing examples without structuring, jumping back and forth between arguments, yes, that's very confusing. That really creates headaches, right? Gap fillers, poor vocabulary, good. Not stating your assumption, repeating ourselves. Repeating ourselves sometimes can be good. It just depends how much you do it and and when you do it. But rambling, yeah, interrupting, using unclear, disorganized language, failing to listen actively, etc., not adapting the message to the person, not finishing sentences. Very good, right? So all this really not helpful, really, really not helpful, right? So, these are pretty much some of the things that you said. Also, too much details, right? Or too much detail at the wrong time can be another example of poor communication. But the consequence of this, the immediate consequence of this, right, is that whatever you're trying to say, people don't get it. It's just because it's hard to follow. It's confusing, right? And so second order effect is that for the person who's listening, so the interviewer or the client, it can get frustrating, that they just don't understand what you're saying, or it can even feel like, oh my God, we're wasting time here. Yeah. For us as the communicator, if we're communicating like that, the second order effect is that we lose credibility. And basically we come across as not client ready. So that's really not helpful. Yeah. So what I would argue is great communication looks very, very different from everything that you described here in terms of rambling, interrupting, blah, 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 right? Great communication looks very different. And in fact, I would say the following, that great communication is one of the facets of leadership, right? Leadership is kind of a multifaceted die, kind of like in Dungeons and Dragons. I don't know if you remember, like these dice with 20 sides. Great communication is one of the aspects. And if you communicate well, then what's going to increase is your gravitas and your executive presence. Basically, the extent to which people listen and your ability to inspire and influence them. Okay, whoever they are, leaders, people around you, etc. Now, there are many things, aspects that make communication really good, but there's 4 of them that basically account for the bulk of it. So if you can make sure that your communication has these 4 aspects, then it will be very strong. So what are these 4? One is that it's crystal clear. Okay. Second is that it be to the point, super efficient. Just don't wait until to make your point, just get to the point. Third, that it be given confidently. And fourth, with empathy. Okay, so those 4, when you manage to achieve all 4, people are more likely to listen and they're more likely to be positively influenced by you. Okay, so what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you 3 techniques that dramatically increase your score, if you will, on clarity, efficiency, confidence, and empathy. And as a result, it will help to improve your gravitas and your executive presence. Now, so specifically, what I'm going to do, we're going to do 2 things. I'm going to describe those techniques and role play them a bit. And then we're going to go back to the videos of those 3 candidates. And we're going to re-listen to them. And I'm going to ask you to basically try to see how effectively are they communicating, these candidates, and to what extent can you connect this to whether or not they're using these techniques. But so let me first start with the description and illustration of these techniques. So the first one is, I call it executive summarize, but it has, many other names. It's also called top-down communication, pyramid communication. At Bain, they call it answer first. It's all the same thing. The whole point of this technique is, the whole idea is that before you start explaining whatever your idea is, your reasoning, etc., you give an executive summary of what you're going to say. Okay, kind of a 10-15-second executive summary. The sort of ultimate structure of an executive summary is that there's a guiding message, like an overall message, maybe 3 supporting arguments, and that's it. And you say that before launching into the detail. The reason for this is that basically you're giving a roadmap to the listener so that it's much easier for them to follow. It's kind of like if you were to kind of show them on a map where we're going to drive. And so when we start driving, they actually understand what you're doing. That's pretty much it. So let me show you an example. And I'm going to show you an example as if I were actually structuring a case. Okay. So let's say that the case question is, should HEC double its MBA class size? What I might say, if I'm structuring this and executive summarizing, I might say the following. So to solve this question, I would explore 3 factors. Will it attract more employers? Will it strengthen the alumni network? And will it increase profits? So on the attractiveness of employers, I would want to explore blah, 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 blah. On whether it will increase the strength of the alumni network, I'd want to explore blah, 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 and so on. Right? So what I've done is I've given a clear roadmap of what I'm going to talk about, of what I'm going to say before I launch into the detail. Okay, that's the technique of executive summarizing. Ines, did you want to say something, or did you just unmute by mistake?
Yeah, it's by mistake.
Okay, no worries. Good. So that's executive summarizing, right? All right. The second technique is a super simple, like incredibly simple technique that you can combine with the first. And this one is called number things. So the idea is that the moment you have more than one item, so more than one topic, more than one reason, more than one argument, you just start numbering them. And you can even use your fingers to do that, right? To help the listener visualize and follow you, right? So the whole idea of numbering is that it makes the structure much more visible. Okay, so again, should HEC double send me a class size? To solve this question, I would explore three factors. First, will it attract more employers to campus? Second, will it strengthen the quality of the alumni network? And third, will it increase the school's profits? So on the first topic, attracting more employers to campus, I think this is important because, and I would want to explore blah, 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 and so on and so forth. Okay, so that's the second technique. The third technique is to use empathetic language. So basically, the idea is here you put yourself explicitly in the other party's shoes, right? So either your counterpart or this third party that we're talking about, and you start using inclusive language, kind of like we, us kind of stuff. So again, should HEC double be a class size? And what I might say is, if I were the dean at HEC, I would want to know three things. First, will it help us to attract more employers to campus? Second, will it strengthen the quality of our alumni network? And third, will it increase our profits? So on the first topic, and so on and so forth. Okay. And so the idea here is that like it just makes the whole thing a little bit more collaborative, more empathetic, and people. Somebody had mentioned earlier, why should we care about great communication? And somebody said it helps to build trust, and that's right. And so the empathy in communication helps to build trust because it helps the listener to feel understood and cared for. Let me just pause here. Any questions about these techniques before we go back to the videos and try to see how well those candidates communicate? Any questions or remarks on any of these three techniques? No? Okay. All right. So let's go back to the videos. We're going to watch them one at a time. And so again, what I want to invite you to do is just really try to figure out how easy is this person to understand? How easy is she to follow? And in other words, how good is her communication, right? Don't worry about the content. Whether we agree, whether she's thinking right or not is really not important right now. It's only the quality of the communication, okay? And then what I also want to invite you to do is kind of see, like, do you notice whether she's using any of the techniques that we discussed, and what is the contribution of this technique or the non-contribution of not using the technique? Okay, so let's watch Jen, and then we'll kind of discuss together.
Mind if I take a few seconds to think about it?
Sure.
As you mentioned, we have three options to choose from here. I think I would want to understand, it's almost a what do you have to believe question. There's a couple of things that I want to look at, and I think you need to think about which option is going to be sort of the best in this what do you have to believe question. Right. So the first thing is just investment. You'd mentioned that each option sort of has different investment criteria. So I'd really want to understand, which of the options actually has the highest ROI. and return on investment.
Okay.
The second, I think, is looking at the competitive marketplace. And I really want to understand sort of how the competitors are going to react and which of the options might have the best sort of competitive reaction for my business.
Okay.
The third, I think, that I'd want to look at is my existing business.
Okay.
So, which of the three options are going to sort of create the least cannibalization on my existing sort of
Okay.
non-3D market.
Okay.
And then the last, I think, another important thing to look at is just execution. So,
Okay.
are we going to be able to execute on this as a company, and which of the options has sort of the least execution risk?
Okay, so let me pause here and let's do the following. Imagine that we're going to give Jen a Google rating on the quality of her communication. So 1 is very poor and 5 is great. Yeah. So just put it in the chat box. No need to explain. I just want to know your numbers. What score would you give her on the quality of her communication, not the content? So what I'm seeing is a lot of 3s and a lot of 3.5s. I mean, there's the occasional 4, but basically a lot of 3s and a lot of 3.5s. Okay, there's also a 2. Okay, but so basically, if I were to kind of average it out more or less, it looks like we are around 3.3, maybe 3.2. Okay, all right, so here's my question for you. Let's first start with what she does well. What does she do well in her communication? And I'm especially interested in your views on any techniques that she applies and what effect it has. She numbers things. Yeah, she numbers things, right? So let's talk about that for a moment. And then we'll talk about the inclusive language. Well, look at that. Moritz kind of no, Moritz, do not edit. That was great. Put it back, your comment. I don't know if you can do that. Yes, bingo. But maybe you want to explain that out loud. Come back. Can you come to us on the mic? Yes.
Sure. Yeah, sure. So I like that she used inclusive language at the start. I actually thought that she didn't number it super well. Maybe I missed that.
Oh,
But I definitely missed the top-down communication, right? So she didn't list all of her buckets before she went to explain them individually. So that made it a bit difficult to follow.
okay. So let's take things one at a time. And I'm actually going to start with the numbering. So indeed, maybe I misunderstood. I think you misunderstood, but I misunderstood that you misunderstood. So actually, if you look at the comments from a lot of other people, it seems like, a lot of people kind of said, hey, she numbered things, right? She kind of said first and second and third, right? So let me just ask this. What is the effect of the fact that she numbered things? And what would have been the effect if she had not numbered things? Anybody? Could be, yeah.
So from my point of view, if she doesn't number some things, it would just make the whole conversation not paused, and it will make everything like floating, like in river. So just consistently going up, and with a lot of mass maybe.
Nice metaphor with the river. Yeah, but that's right. Yeah. So when we don't structure, when we don't number, it's very difficult to see the structure of someone, the structure that they're using, if any. But if they are structuring, but without numbering, it's hard for us to see that structure, right? So we don't know when they're starting a new point, or it makes it a lot harder to see when they're starting a new point. And so you might even start to wonder like, oh, hold on, is she starting a new point now, or is it a continuation of the same point? And as you're trying to figure this out, you're now no longer able to listen to what she's still saying, and then the whole thing falls apart. Does that make sense? So numbering is like, it really makes a big difference, a big difference, right? And yes, she does do that. So I'm just going to put that in the sheet here. So she basically has like 4 points, The fourth one, she doesn't call it fourth, but she says the last, but you know, that's okay. Okay, now she uses a fair amount of inclusive language, so I think that's pretty good, right? She often says us and things like that, so that's pretty good. And then indeed, no top-down communication. What does she do at the beginning? Did anybody like understand or notice what she does at the beginning? And if you were just confused at the beginning, that's also, you can totally say that. So her beginning was a little bit, I tell you, her beginning was a little bit confusing. Honestly, I think it's very hard to understand what she's trying to say at the beginning. It kind of goes like, boo, boo. Yeah, she tried to reframe the question in a way, or she tried to put some kind of a frame on it. But in the end, it's kind of like, she really doesn't do a very good job. It tends to confuse things, and it has nothing to do with what comes after. So basically, this is my view of what she does. She creates chaos at the beginning, right? Yeah, she kind of creates this chaos at the beginning. It's kind of a little, and at some point she says first, and you're kind of like, oh, okay, there's some kind of structure coming, okay? So, all right, let's go back to the videos, and now let's listen to our second friend, Gail, and then we'll comment.
Do you mind if I take a second just to think about this?
Sure.
So if I were to think about this, there are three different buckets that I want to consider.
Okay.
So that would first be looking at the revenues, second, the investment and costs upfront,
Okay.
and then third, comparing those to the status quo. So within each of those, on the revenue side, you mentioned that we'll have a different profitability depending upon if we go with the glasses option or the no glasses.
Yes.
The price point will be different, and we'll need to think through how that impacts the business.
Okay, good.
Second, in terms of costs, you also mentioned that it would actually require a different amount of investment on our end
Yes.
to develop the two different types of products.
Yes.
So we'll want to figure out what the actual amount of investment is and how that compares to profitability.
Okay.
Finally, once we have those two pieces for the no glasses and glasses options, we'll want to compare that to the status quo. So what are we actually doing today, and how do our economics look today?
Okay. So let me ask you the same thing. Hold on. There's actually a question. I'm going to see if I can quickly address that. What was the question? Somebody said, if you start badly like the first interviewer did during, how do you come back from this, ameliorate during the moment? Do you pause and restart? Yeah, you could pause and restart. Yeah, why not? It could just be like, okay, hold on. What I just said make no sense. So let's please scratch it and let me start over. Boom. No problem. That's totally fine. Yeah, people make mistakes all the time. So that's cool. I would definitely recommend that. Okay, so back to the, whoops, hold on. Am I sharing the right thing here? Hold on, I don't know if I'm sharing the right thing. Back to the chat box, what I'd like from you is, please give me the score that you would give Gail. So again, 5 is great, 1 is poor. Score on her communication, not the structuring itself, but not the content, but the communication. Wow. Okay. All right. So these are like totally different numbers, right? Totally different numbers. I'm kind of eyeballing it, right? But it looks like a lot of 5s, 4s, and 4.5s. So roughly, I might not have it exactly right, but it looks like it's kind of a 4.5. Okay. So what does she do well? Our friend Gail. She communicates top down, that's right. She numbers the single aspects, right? Making the structure obvious, very clear top-down structure, numbers things, executive summarize, exactly, right? So she does all of that. So kind of basically, this is kind of what it looks like that she does, right? And afterwards, she continues to number things. So when she goes into the details, she continues to number things, right? So what is the no visual numbering? That's right. Yeah, there's always room for improvement. What is the impact? Like, how does she come across, this Gail person? And I'm looking right now for the positives. There might be some negatives, but on the positives, how does she come across? What would you say? Like, this woman is, yeah, more senior, more collected, more competent, right? Kind of like, also confident is a word that I often hear. Kind of like, hey, this woman is like, she knows what, yeah, exactly, right? Like Ines says, she knows what she's talking about, right? And so when you hear someone who kind of comes across like this and who's confident and who seems to know what they're talking about, we're more likely to have trust in them, like in their competence, right? So, and that part of the reason that she comes across as confident like that has to do with the style of communication, which is basically the fact that like she's top down, numbering things and super efficient. It's kind of like boom, 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 boom. It's like, wow, okay, clear, right? So that's the effect that the combination of executive summarizing with numbering things can have. Okay, super powerful. Now, what might be some maybe, improvement feedback that we might give her? So somebody said, okay, Morris said, no visualizing of the numbering. What else? What else would you say? Yeah, maybe, could be a bit better on this front. More empathetic? Yeah, this is something that I get a lot, right? She kind of potentially seems a little bit distant, a little bit cold, sometimes maybe even a little bit robotic, right? So it'd be nice if there were like a little bit more warmth. And maybe some of that, what she does has something that is partially driven by the fact that she speaks a bit fast. So maybe there's an opportunity to slow down a little bit and stuff like this, right? Okay. All right, let's now watch our last friend, Kristen, and then we'll discuss.
Well, in order to sort of believe which is the right way to head, I'd look at 4 different things. So the first thing I would look at is customers. How are my customers going to accept this new product?
Yes.
I'd have to imagine that someone would prefer to watch TV without the glasses. But there's a little bit more of doing some research and seeing what our customers are really thinking there. The second thing I would look at is, what are my competitors going to do? How easy is it going to be for them to go to market? What are they going to be thinking about pricing? I think there's a lot of interesting information that could be seen there.
Okay.
Third, I think about cost implications, obviously. Sort of how are we going to have to change what materials we're sourcing? What are the R&D costs going to be?
Okay.
How, just sort of looking at those topics in more details.
Good.
And then the fourth thing I would think about is kind of, how is this fitting in with my current capabilities? How can I use the processes I already have in place to make this? How is it going to affect my current products that I'm offering? So those are the 4 things I would look at.
Okay, so again, please give Kristen a score, 1 to 5. So here the emerging picture, right, is a bunch of 4s, a few 3.5s, a few 4.5s, roughly. So again, I'm kind of eyeballing it, but what it looks like is that it's somebody gives a dollar sign. I think that's a 4. So that, looks more or less like 4. Okay. So basically, Kristen, at least quantitatively speaking, you're putting her between Jen and Gail. Okay, so what does Kristen do well in her communication? Doesn't have a top down, but she really embarks us with the details. Okay. She divides her ideas into 4 buckets, very empathetic, right? That's right. So she definitely numbers things. I think it's quite empathetic. And and indeed, it's very empathetic in the sense that, like, first you feel that there's a certain warmth, right, in her tone of voice, the speed with which she speaks, but also her choice of words, right? Us and stuff like that. So she's quite empathetic. What does she do at the beginning? So somebody said she doesn't give an executive summary. I think that's right. But does she give us any kind of insight about what's coming up in the beginning? Anybody remember? She says she will talk about 4 things. That's right. Good listening, Ines, right? So that's exactly what she does. She tells us that there are 4 things coming up. So it's better than Jen, because Jen doesn't even tell us how many things are coming up. But of course, it's not as insightful or as informative as what Gail does, because Gail told us what those 4 things were going to be, right? So again, it's good, but there's room for improvement. Somebody has noticed before that Kristen kind of gives a heading at the beginning of each of her topics, which is actually kind of cool. It's kind of like a mini executive summary at the beginning of each topic. So there's definitely something to be said about that, right? But overall, this is kind of what we see. So the sort of dream communication here, right, would be if we took the best of Gail and the best of Kristen. So basically kind of like the efficiency and the confidence that exudes from Gail's communication, combined with the warmth and sort of empathy that exudes from Kristen's communication. And there we would have, something really, I mean, already, I think both Kristen and Gail are very good communicators. Let's be clear about that. But if we want to sort of imagine, this ideal that we could strive for, that would be kind of like the best of best between those 2. Any questions or remarks on these videos in terms of the content, sorry, not the content, the communication, the techniques that we discussed, etc. Yes, Tobias.
Yes. Thank you. I'm always wondering, if you have several levels of arguments, would you go there like width first or depth first?
Sorry, would you go with what first or what first?
Would you go like through 1, 2, 3 first, like width first, or like depth first?
I'm not sure I'm understanding what you're saying.
So no, what I'm trying to say, if you have several levels of arguments, so you have like, for example, 3 arguments for the first bucket.
Yeah.
Would you then like present the first level of your arguments first? So going there through the first level basically, and then break the several arguments down? Or would you go into the first bucket, break it down, go into the second bucket, break it down, and then to the third and break it down?
Okay, now I understand. No, so basically I would say there are 3 questions that we should explore, number 1, number 2, number 3. And now once I go into the first one, within that, there's three topics, A, B, C. So A is blah, blah, B is blah, blah, C is blah, blah. Now, moving on to the second overall topic, and so on. Does that answer your question?
Yes, thank you.
Okay, great. Okay. So look, these techniques are, they're not difficult to learn. They're not difficult to master. You just kind of need to start doing it, right? And the return on the investment is quite high because, as you can see, right, for example, if you can, come across like Gail, combined with a bit of warmth during your case interviews, the impact will be huge, huge. You're going to basically look like this very confident person who is, very confident even when confronted with a problem that she doesn't master, right? You're going to come across as confident, and that's huge, right? And the interviewer is going to love that, because their interviewer is going to be thinking, hey, if we put this kind of person in front of our clients, our clients are going to love that person, and so on. So the impact is of great communication is very, very, very strong, and you can get to it with not too much practice, because these techniques are not that difficult to master, right? The other thing I want to say about this is, consultants speak like this. So for those of you who are interested in consulting, but actually there's also quite a few execs who speak like this. And so the point I'm making is that if you speak like that too, they're going to, just because of the way you speak, they're going to see you as one of their own. It's kind of like you're going to come across like you're part of the tribe already, even though you haven't formally joined the tribe. Yeah. And that will also play in your favor. So I really recommend invest in practicing this. You're probably going to go through a phase where you execute this in a very robotic way. So then, continue to practice until you can add back some personality in the way that you do this, right? You don't need to sound like a robot when you're doing top-down communication. Ideally, you do top-down communication with your own voice, with your own warmth, with your own persona, but without sacrificing the confidence and the efficiency that comes with it. Okay. So that's pretty much what I had on communication. Now, yes, of course, there's 100 other things you could learn to make your communication that much better. But honestly, if you focus on these 3 things, you're going to get 80 to 90% of like the benefits of great communication. And if you want to be practical, pragmatic, that's what you want to aim for. Any more questions on the topic of communication? No? Okay. Then what I propose that we do is we then pivot to content again. So what I'm going to do now is we're going to do a bit of a refresher of the structuring stuff that we covered last time, but with a little bit more depth. Fundamentally, what we're going to do in this section is we're going to remind ourselves of what do we mean by a structure and what is it that makes a structure good. But we're going to do very, very little on the process of building it. It's once we get into the techniques that I'm going to show you a whole bunch of ways to build them. Okay, so first, what are we trying to get to? I'm going to use the help desk example again because we have that's an example. So ultimately, what we're trying to get to when we're structuring is something like this, right? So a tree that is in the form of questions. This is what we're trying to get to. Okay. Now, the whole bit about structuring, this is really about building intimacy with the problem, like really getting to know the problem. One of the greatest problem solvers of all time, had this quote that I'm sure all of you know, right? If I had an hour to solve a problem, I'd spend 55 minutes thinking about it and only 5 minutes thinking about solutions. So the 55 minutes thinking about the problem is really kind of like, here's my problem. And it's kind of like, I spend time with the problem and I look at it and, I build intimacy, I connect with the problem, right? I'm not thinking about solutions. I'm just trying to understand the problem. Okay. So everything I'm going to show you today is about that, is about the 55 minutes. So now where does it start with? The first foundation is structuring starts with the case question, because you might remember the case question is the problem we need to solve. Like how we define a problem in business or in general, let's say in problem solving, the way that we define a problem is as a question. And within the sphere of business is as a question about what to do. The case question is the problem you need to solve. Now, most of the time, the interviewers give it to you on a silver platter. Here it is. Sometimes, maybe 1 out of 5, 1 out of 4, They don't give it to you explicitly, so you kind of need to extract it. You might remember we did that with the help desk case, right? But either way, make sure that you are 100% certain about the exact case question, because that is what you will need to structure. Not the whole context, just the question. Now, second thing that we talked about, what we're going to do to structure it is we're going to use our analytical skills. A very specific type, basically the type that involves breaking things down into parts. Remember, we talked about the metaphor of breaking down a vacuum cleaner into its components. So kind of, right, to understand how it works. That's building intimacy to understand with the vacuum, to understand how it works. So that's exactly what we're going to do. We're going to break down the question into its parts in order to better understand what's going on here. Okay? So we're going to decompose it, disaggregate it, dissect it, whatever word suits, whatever word works for you. Okay? But into parts. And the format in which we're going to do this is we're going to do it in the form of questions, right? So we're going to take the original case question, we're going to break it down into smaller, more granular questions, and we're going to break down those questions into even smaller, more granular questions. So we're going to build what's called a analytical question tree. It's a question tree, and it's analytical because we're doing a breakdown into ever more granular parts of what we had before. Okay. All right. Now, by the way, if we go back to Jen's structure, you'll see that this is exactly what she does. She breaks it down into questions, right? And the questions that she comes up with are the following: which option has the highest ROI? Which option results in the best competitive reaction? Which option causes the least cannibalization on the existing business? And which option has the least execution risk? So let's listen again to Jen, and you'll see. Remember, the beginning is kind of like all over the place. It makes no sense. But once she starts to number things, then this is when her structure really starts to come out. So let's listen.
As you mentioned, we have three options to choose from here. I think I would want to understand, it's almost a what do you have to believe question. There's a couple of things that I want to look at, and I think you need to think about which option is going to be sort of the best in this what do you have to believe question. Right. So the first thing is just investment. You'd mentioned that each option sort of has different investment criteria. So I'd really want to understand, which of the options actually has the highest ROI and return on investment. Okay. The second, I think, is looking at the competitive marketplace. And I'd really want to understand sort of how the competitors are going to react and which of the options might have the best sort of competitive reaction for my business. Okay. The third, I think, that I'd want to look at is my existing business. Okay. So, which of the three options are going to sort of create the least cannibalization on my existing sort of non-3D market. Okay. And then the last, I think, another important thing to look at is just execution. So are we going to be able to execute on this as a company, and which of the options has sort of the least execution risk?
Okay. So Jen does a really, really good job of framing her structure in the form of questions. We might agree or disagree with the very specific questions she comes up with. That's not relevant right now. But the fact that she's framing all this in the form of questions is really, really good. That's exactly what we want. Why? Because questions give us something to sort out, to solve, right? And if I were to link it to the topic of leadership, I would say, great leaders, what they do is they figure out the right questions to ask. And then it's, other people who try to find the answers, right? And if you're going to go into, you guys are going to be in leadership positions very quickly. And leadership is not necessarily a title, but it's more kind of like where you have responsibility and you help others, you guide others towards achieving things. And that you're going to be in leadership positions very, very soon. So any questions about that so far? Okay, so then let's continue. So if we go back to our help desk case, right? What we talked about,
as you mentioned,
this was the question that we were trying to solve, right? A couple of weeks back. And we talked about three sort of micro steps that we want to follow in the beginning. So first, we want to isolate the core in the question. Why? because it's actually not the whole question that we want to break down, but just the essence of the question. So we're going to focus on the essence of the question. Yeah. And the essence of the question here is essentially about restoring profits. So we highlight this. And then we reflect on that until we get some idea about how to start the breakdown. Now, profits, we all know what it is. It's revenue minus cost. So boom, we have an insight about how to do the breakdown so we can start. And remember, we want to break it down into the form of questions. So instead of saying, hey, this breaks down into revenue and cost, what we're going to say is, hey, we're going to break down into how can we increase revenues and how can we reduce cost. And then if we continue to follow the same process, we end up with something that could look like this, right? So again, the reminder here is we want to isolate the core in the question and break that down. Okay. All right. So I want to spend a little bit more time on this notion of a core in a question. And I want to try to really understand the difference between the core of a question and the details in a question. Okay, and this is one of those things that really distinguishes great problem solvers from sort of average problem solvers. So imagine we are in I don't know how well you guys know the geography of Spain, but imagine that we are right now in Barcelona, which is in the northeast part of Spain. And somebody says, I want to bike to Valencia. How can I use a compass to help me? Okay. And somebody else who is also in Barcelona says, I want to bike to Bilbao. How can I use a compass to help me? Let me ask you this. Are these the same problem or are they different problems? The essence of the problems that these two people are asking help with, are they the same problem or different problems? What do you think? Not a trick question. They're the same. They're very, very nice for Roxanne. Very nice. Same problem, different results. Same problem. It's about how to use a compass. That's right. It's the same problem. The solution will be different, but it's the same problem. Okay, so how we think about this problem needs to be the same. So if I slightly reframe my phrasing now, right, basically we have two problems. One is, how can I use a compass to help me bike to Valencia? The other one, how can I use a compass to help me bike to Bilbao? But that's the same problem, right? So the core here, basically using a compass, impacts the nature of the problem. That's the 55 minutes, yeah? The detail in the question, Valencia, Bilbao, impacts the fit of the specific solution. So, you know, to get to Valencia, we're going to need to bike south. So we're going to need to learn how to use a compass and then execute that by going south. To bike to Bilbao, we're going to need to bike west. But fundamentally, the essence here is about learning how to use a compass. Okay, so this is a really big difference between the core and the detail. Yeah. Great problem solvers recognize what is at the essence of the question, and they don't get distracted by the details. Average problem solvers get distracted by the detail. They don't realize that a detail is a detail, and they get bogged down by that. And this is what makes problem solving so much more difficult for them, because they don't realize that actually, yeah, this detail is just not relevant right now. It's relevant later when we're actually coming up with solutions, but not when we're thinking about the problem. Okay, now, I want to make another point about the cores. It actually turns out that very often questions have more than one core. And that is actually cool when there's more than one, because remember, when we're breaking down, we're focusing on a core. But so when you have two cores, you can decide to focus on this one or on this one. So the more cores in the question, the more optionality you have. the more structures you can come up with, which is really cool. Okay, so I'm going to show you a bunch of questions, and I want you to tell me what are the cores in those questions. So this question has 2 cores. Okay, and I'll tell you, I'll give you a hint. Mars is not one of them. So what might be the 2 cores, the 2 sort of potential focuses, foci, if I'm going to be linguistically correct, in this question? What do you think that they could be? Taste is one, correct. We really need to look at the words in the question here. So taste is one, and the fact that we're talking about M&Ms. That's right, exactly. So taste or improved taste is one, the other one is M&Ms. These are the 2 choices that we have. Okay, I'll show you in a few minutes, or yeah, I will show you later in today's session what it would mean to focus on the taste versus focusing on M&Ms. But for now, just trust me that like these are 2 different ways we can look at the question. Okay, here's another question with 2 cores again. Just tell me, what are they? What are the 2 cores? Hint, it's not Apple. Quality in iPhones, bingo. Okay, good. What about this one? Supply chain costs and toothpaste. Yes, Keisha is definitely, she's got this one down. How about this one? So RHDHV is a company. We could replace this with BCG. I think you're getting the hang of it. So now it should not be too difficult to figure this one out. Quality and university recruits. Yes, very good. All right, the next one has 3 cores. And it's not university. Or it's not, I should say. Quality, yes. No, hold on, not quality. Not quality. There's no quality in that question. Hold on. So revenues, donations by alumni, 50%. So actually it's revenues, donations, and alumni. 20-30 doesn't matter. 50% doesn't matter. They don't matter. Okay, they really don't matter. Let me go back here. Let me just try to illustrate why they don't matter. If I go back to our help desk example, which is here. Here is how can help desk restore profits in the next 2 years. Yeah. If I change the 2 years to 20 years, I'm still going to come up with the same structure. How can we increase revenues? How can we reduce costs? Right? I'm going to come up with the same structure. If I change the 2 years to 1 day, I'm still going to come up with the same structure. The only difference will be the solutions that work. Because obviously the solution, if I only have 1 day, there's a lot of things that won't work. If I have 10 years, there's a lot of things that will work. Yeah. Now, restore profit is also a certain measure of success. We could say increase profits to 100 million or to 1 billion or to 1 million, but it doesn't matter what is level I'm trying to get to. I'm still going to think about it in terms of how to increase revenues and how to reduce costs. Okay, so the numbers in the question, at least in this question and in the other question we were just looking at, they don't matter. Okay, this is the kind of stuff that people get distracted by. All right, 2 more questions. This one has 2 cores. What are they? Dubai Lounge and Travelers. That's right. Very good, Keisha. Very, very nice. That's right. Excellent. All right, last one. 2 cores. Sales and televisions, that's right. Okay, so that's easy. But now the thing is, if we just look at this last question, how can retailer increase sales of televisions? Actually, this question, really what we mean with this question is the following. What we're really meaning is, how can the retailer increase sales of televisions to customers? But we don't say to customers because it seems obvious. It's kind of like, well, why waste our energy and saliva pronouncing to customers, because it's obvious that you sell the televisions to customers. But here's the thing. So of course, it makes things a lot easier not to say it, but from a problem-solving perspective, making that explicit helps because it gives us a third core. Okay? And remember, the more cores we have, the more options we have, and I will show you this in the next part of today's session. All right, good. So I wanted to clarify this. So now, if we go back to the help desk example, this is, remember, this is what we've defined as, this is what we mean by a structure, which is a breakdown of the question or of the core of the question or a core of the question in the form of questions that ultimately look like a question tree. And then we said there are 3 criteria that make a structure good. Number 1, solution focus, meaning it's the opposite of data questions, meaning it's the questions that we have in our structure are such that solving for those questions actually gives us a partial solution. And when we solve for all these questions, these smaller questions, we get a whole bunch of partial solutions. We put them all together, and that gives us an overall solution. Test number 2, MECE. I don't need to explain that one. Test number 3, it fits the case, because fitting the case is the best insurance, or is the best way to ensure that, like, basically it makes business sense, or it makes sense in a real world kind of way, right? So here, let me just ask you, what is the, if I had broken it down like this, or if I had a structure like this, what's the problem with a structure like this? Why does it not work? It's not solution focused. That's right. What is it? What is the focus? What do these questions do? Research, that's right. Exactly. Information, analyze, just identification, right? Exactly. It's good for evaluation, but it's not answer driven. That's right. Very good. Excellent. Super. Awesome. Good. So here's a little bit of an exercise for you. I'm going to show you 2 structures, whoops, for this question. Should Apple build an iCar? Imagine is basically 2 teams that are working on the same question, right? So I'm going to show you the structure for team left and the structure for team right. And what I want you to do is really think about, which structure do you like better based on all the things that we've discussed, and why? And then please tell me in the chat box which one you like better. Don't let yourselves be influenced by what people write in the chat box. Just really just use your own mind. Okay, so here's team left's structure. How much profit can Apple generate? Does it make strategic sense? Do they have the capabilities? Can they manage the key risks? And here's the structure from team right. Analyze potential customers, analyze competition, analyze Apple's internal capabilities. So I'm just really curious to know now, you don't need to give the reason right now, but just what do you think, who do you think has the stronger structure? Team left or team right? Oh man, I love you guys. You guys are so good. So good. I tell you, 2 days ago, I was giving the same workshop somewhere else. I'm not going to say where. All the answers were right. Yeah, team right. But all of you came back with left. So now, why? somebody, please tell me, why are you voting for left? Solution focus, fits the case, me see, right? More precise, everything in the form of questions, me see. Look at Morris comments, really good, right? If all questions are answered, the main question is solved automatically, very nice, because you can arrive at solutions based on the question, clear and specific, exactly, right? The right side is just a very introduction, yes. The right side, basically, so, I mean, you guys totally got it. You explained it very well, right? Basically, on the left, it tells us what we need to solve for, right? On the right, it just gives us work to do. And it kind of gets us trapped into what's classically called analyzing without solving, which is really not helpful. Analyzing without solving is really, really not helpful. Yeah. So here's the thing. On the team on the right, either the team is thinking right, but they communicate poorly. So in other words, because what's written is very vague. So maybe they're actually thinking right, but they've just communicated very poorly, or their thinking is very vague. But either way, it doesn't work. Okay. All right. Let's talk a little bit. Where do we analyze if there is addressable market on the left side? Good question. So it will come from the profits, the very first box, because how much profit does it generate? You're going to break it down into how much revenue can we make, what will be our cost, and the revenue will basically be how many cars we can sell times the number of the price per car, and the number of cars that we can sell is going to be a function of how big is the market and how much of that market we get. So it's all in there. Yeah, it's implicit, but it's in there. So of course, if I were to show you the whole structure, I would go down more than, beyond level 1. Right now, I've only shown you level 1, but if we were to go to level 2 or even level 3, then the question of like an addressable market would either become explicit, or at least we would get much closer to it. Okay, now I want to do something on MISI. Talk a little bit about MISI. I know you all understand MISI very well, but maybe this bit you don't know. So imagine this. Imagine I were to take all of you. There's 96 of you. We're all in a room, and I'm going to ask you to move in the room according to the following ways. And I want you to tell me which ways work and which ways don't work. And let's assume that we are clear on definitions, like we all have the same understanding of definitions. And let's keep things simple, and don't look for the exception that somehow is going to make things difficult. So I'm going to show you 5 ways that I want you to essentially I'm going to ask you to move around the room 5 times, and I want you to tell me which ones work and which ones you're like, oh, this is not going to work. So first one, men on one side, women on the other. Second, short people on one side, tall people on the other. Third, wealthy people on one side, middle class people in the middle, poor people on the other side. Fourth, urban people on one side, men on the other. And fifth, short on one side, white in the middle, and poor on the right. Which ones of these work and which ones don't work? That's right. Well, ABC work, D and E don't work. That's right. So why do ABC work and D and E not work? Separates well, follows one line. Oh. Okay, okay. So Tenedia. Explain yourself. Maybe with the microphone, yes.
Yeah, it's law. But what I mean is that, for example, A is based on gender, so it's just one logic. And for example, D is like gender and location.
That's right. Very good. Very good. This is spot on, right? So A, B, and C are all based on only one logic. So when you try to do a breakdown using one logic, things will work. I mean, then, okay, you need to execute well, but things will work and you're not going to have a messiness problem. But when you're using more than one logic to do a breakdown, like D and E, then you create messiness problems. Not only you create overlaps, but most likely you also create gaps. Okay, so the key to ensuring messiness is that when you break down, so I'm calling this dimension, you call it logic, whatever, it doesn't matter what we call it. But the key in order to ensure that you remain messy is that when you do a breakdown, that you're only using one logic within that breakdown. Now, when you go to the next level of breakdown, you can now introduce a new logic. But for that one question that you're breaking down, that you only use one logic or one dimension. Okay, that is the key to being messy. So most people, they try to solve the messiness by symptom. You know, it's kind of like they come up with something and then they're just testing, is it messy? But even better than just testing to see if it's messy is, do you know if you thought about it in the right way? So Laure, spot on. I hope that's clear with everybody. Yeah. Okay. So let me show you, in fact, an example of this. If we look at this help desk example that we've seen many times, right? There's no overlaps here. If you look on the cost side, I'm now going to change one of the boxes. The reduce call center cost, I change it to reduce fixed cost. Now, clearly, I have all sorts of overlaps now, right? This becomes a big problem. But fundamentally, the underlying reason is because when I go back to what I had before, I had only one logic, basically call center costs, dispatch, right, and overhead. They're basically three different buildings in my operations. Yeah. Whereas fixed cost, that's about the relationship to sales volume. So it doesn't, so we have two logics here or two dimensions here. Yeah, so it doesn't work. Yeah, so what comes with fixed cost is something else which describes the relationship to volume, and that's basically variable cost. Yeah, so there we go. Okay, last point on why we want things to fit the case, because we want them to basically make sense in the real world. And I will say this, coming up with a structure that is solution focused and messy, there's infinitely many structures that do that, infinitely many. And some of them are great, like this one, right? We can break down costs by operational center or by building in the operations. We can do it by relationship to sales volume. We could do it by day of week. But then if you actually think about it, that by day of week, it doesn't make sense, at least not for a help desk. For a restaurant, maybe, for a cinema, maybe, but not for help desk, right? And so even though it technically works from a pure logic perspective, from a real world perspective, it doesn't work, right? And so this is why we have this third test, because we want it to work from a real world perspective, make business sense. And the best way to ensure that it makes business sense is that it should basically fit the case, okay? So if I recap our structuring, how to think. We want to ensure that we're 100% clear and certain about the case question. Then we isolate and focus on one of the cores. We break down, ignore step 3 for now. We break down the question into an analytical question tree, and we test it with the 3-part health check. And then how we communicate, we show the question tree, we restate the question, we executive summarize a number of things. And then once we've done presenting our structure, we suggest where to start based on the highest impact. Okay, So I have one little exercise for you, and then we'll take a break. Suppose is the following. Our family will expand. We're going to need a new house that costs 500K, and we already have 300K. And we don't want to borrow, whatever the reason, we don't want to borrow. So the problem that we have to solve is the following. How can we accumulate 200K before baby arrives? Let me just first ask you the following question. What is the core here? There's only one. It's not 200K per se. Accumulate money. So accumulate, yeah, dollars or whatever the currency is. How much of it is not relevant for the structuring, but the fact that we want to accumulate money. That's right. So does it matter how much is whether it's 200K or 500K? No. Does it matter when baby arrives? Not in the problem. That's right. That's right. Very good. Excellent. Yeah, you see, most people will get totally distracted and they'll be like, when does baby arrive? But it doesn't matter. Not for how to think about the problem. So I want to invite you to try it out. Try to build a structure for this. You can go to either spreadsheet. Hold on, I'm putting them in the chat box. You can go to either one. Try to build it, again, in the form of questions that are not data mining questions. So basically solution-oriented questions. Yeah. You might want to claim your space somewhere so that somebody doesn't write over you. Yeah, very nice. You guys are doing a really, 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 really good job. Like you're doing, I see most of you are really not only doing this in the form of questions, but actually like true solution-oriented questions instead of data mining questions, which is really great. Really good. You guys are basically doing real problem solving. It's really nice to see. Great. Yeah, really good. Really, really good. You're really getting the hang of it now. You're doing some real problem solving. You're entering into a new world. You might not realize this, but you really are now like entering into the world of problem solving, which means that you're going to be ready for the techniques I'm going to show you. All right, let me just kind of quickly show you what the tree could look like for this. But again, I think there's fundamentally, I think everybody more or less is thinking about the first level in the same way, more or less, huh? Because it's hard to imagine a lot of different ways to think about this. But basically, how can we increase income and how can we reduce expenses? Seems, yeah. I mean, maybe somebody can come up with like a totally different creative way of thinking about it, but this seems kind of the most obvious and intuitive. Now, income, we can think about the sources of income, right? And so at least economists will tend to think about it in terms of like there's income that comes from labor, that's income that comes from capital, and then other sources. So you can think about it like this: how can we earn more from work? How can we earn more from investing? And how can we get money in other ways? So that could be inheritance, donations, stealing, as long as you only do it once, because otherwise, if you repeat it, it becomes work. But anyway, these are some ways you could think about revenue or income. And then expenses, of course, you could think about it in terms of the classic household spending categories like utilities, food, clothing, etc. You could. Another way you could think about it is a little bit more mathematical, like this. How can we buy fewer things? And then how can we pay less for the things that we continue to buy? Okay. So notice again how when baby arrives has no bearing on the structure. It'll have bearing on the solutions that work. Because if baby arrives, in a week, investing in VC is not going to help. If baby arrives in 10 years, investing in VC could be an idea, right? But so when baby arrives only impacts the solutions, but not the way we think about it. Yeah. If baby arrives next week, we could still think about day trading, for example. Any questions on this? Or remarks? Okay. Good. I propose then, let's take a break now, recharge, right? Do whatever you need to kind of recharge. And let's regroup at 4:25. So it's just shy of 15 minutes. And then we will move on to, I will show you techniques that you can deploy to basically really build those structures. So see you in just shy of 15 minutes. Okay, amigos, we're going to restart. So hope that you were able to have a good break and recharge. So let me just remind you of the key points that we covered before the break that are going to be really necessary for what we're going to do now. So we covered, so we know that we take the question, we want to identify a core or the cores of the question, and we're going to basically try to break down one of the cores of a question. Oh, sound. Do other people have an issue with sound? No, no. Okay, might be you, Jan. Okay. What was I saying? Oh yeah. So the cores. So we want to identify one of the identify the cores, and then we're going to try to break down the question based on one of the cores. Okay. And then of course, again, we want to do it in the form of questions that are solution oriented. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to show you techniques for how-to questions. So first, I want to be clear. Let's define what we mean by how-to questions, and then I'm going to show you some techniques. Okay. So a how-to question is very simple. It's a question that asks us how to achieve an objective or a certain set of objectives, right? So the most generic form is how can we achieve X, or how can we achieve X and Y? Okay. Now, before I show you the techniques, it's actually helpful to understand in the most fundamental level how to think about these questions. And the way to think about these questions is that basically if you think about the answer that you're going to give to a how-to question, it's going to be basically you're going to be telling the client or whatever, to achieve your objective, you should do action 1, action 2, action 3, etc. Okay. And so the implication of this is that, and by the way, it might seem obvious, but this is different from options questions. In the options questions, you don't recommend a series of actions. You actually give a list of reasons. So here you recommend a list of actions. So these are the actions that will produce the desired result. So when we're structuring, we're not coming up with very specific actions because these are the solutions. But what we're going to do is we're going to come up with the types of actions that could lead to the desired results. Okay, that's really the that's really the key. So one sec, I just need to write something. Right. So sorry about that. All right. So essentially, the types of actions, essentially, you can think of them as change drivers or value drivers. Okay. That's basically what they are. Now, by far, the simplest way of framing a breakdown of a how-to question is with more how-to questions. And I really don't recommend trying to do it in any other way. This is like by far the simplest. Okay. How is basically very action-oriented, right? It's the one preposition that is focused on, that is action-oriented, that is dynamic. All the others, when, where, what, why, how, who, are very static. Okay. All right. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 5 techniques, 5 ways of thinking for how to tackle a how-to question. And 4 of those kind of come together. And I call them the 4 angles because they're 4 different angles from which you can look at the problem. The 5th one is a very, very simple technique that is not super powerful, but it's kind of nice to have just in case. Okay, so let's start with the first 4. And the example we're going to use is a question that we've already talked about. even though, but we haven't explored it. But this is the question we're going to use as for the example. How can Mars improve the taste of M&Ms? So remember, we've got to go back to this question of the cores, and basically we have two potential cores here, the taste and M&Ms. Okay, so what I'm going to show you now, the 4 different angles that we could look at this. So one of the ways, if I focus on M&Ms, not taste, but M&Ms, one of the ways that I could think about this is actually, I could basically take the M&Ms and break them down into ingredients. And the idea being, if I can improve the ingredients or improve the taste of the ingredients, then I can improve the taste of the M&Ms. Right? So my dimension, or as Laure would call the logic, is the ingredients. And then I could break it down like this. How can Mars improve the taste of the chocolate? How can Mars improve the taste of the peanuts, of the cocoa butter, of the other ingredients? Okay? That's one way to think about it. Essentially, this kind of thinking is called component thinking. Okay, what I've done is I've taken one of my cores, the M&Ms, and I've broken it down into its components. Okay. Another way of thinking about this is to take my M&Ms again, but notice how the M&Ms, they're a population, right? It's not just one, there's a whole, I mean, we're talking about all the M&Ms. And so when it's a population, what you can do is you can basically break down the population. So in this case, I could basically, the logic or the dimension I could use is the types of M&M products. So in other words, how can Mars improve the taste of the green M&Ms, of the blue M&Ms, of the red M&Ms, of other M&Ms? Okay, this is segmentation thinking, because I've basically taken a population of objects in this case, and I've segmented it. Okay, so now the third way of looking at this is different, because these first two, they were just kind of taking my core and I'm essentially breaking down the core itself. But the third way is actually thinking more about what contributes to, what helps explain what's happening. So if I focus on taste here, I'm gonna essentially think about the drivers of taste. Okay, so it's not so much the components of taste, but it's more the drivers. So it's the factors that help explain taste. Now, I had to do a bit of research to find this out because I didn't know this off the top of my head. But the way that scientists think about this is the following. And I'll put it in the structure. So we could break it down like this. How can Mars improve the flavor? How can you improve the texture, the scent / aroma, and the visual aspect? All of these are basically the factors or the drivers that contribute to the experience of taste. This is called driver thinking. Okay. And lastly, still on the subject of kind of causality, here I'm going to focus on M&Ms again, and I'm going to think, basically what you can do is you can think about it in terms of, if you want to improve the M&Ms, one way you can think about it is try to improve the process that ultimately leads to the creation of M&Ms. So the most obvious process here is the manufacturing process. So the structure could look like this. How can Mars improve the center's chocolate paste? So, it's the center of the M&M, which is basically made of a chocolate paste. Then how can they improve the shaping of that center? How can they improve the sugar coating? And how can they improve the coloring and the polishing? Okay, so this is called process thinking. So these are 4 different ways of looking at the same problem. And in some cases, I focus on M&Ms. In some cases, I focus on taste. Okay. Let me just pause here. Any questions about this? Any reflections? Anything that's not clear on this? Okay. So let me just put a little bit more light onto these 4 ways of thinking, and then we'll look at another example. So here are the 4 ways of thinking, right? So we have component thinking, segmentation, drivers, and process. Component and segmentation, basically what they are is it's very much the type of thinking that's involved is very much around the what it is, the what of the core. So you're taking the core and you're just breaking it down. So either into its components, or if that core can be viewed as a population, then you're basically segmenting that population. That's what we did with the M&Ms. Yeah. The other 2, it's not so much the what, but it's more the how it comes about. So it's much more like causality thinking, right? It's breaking down the causes of the core. So you can either basically think of the drivers, which is kind of like a list of the causes, or it can be structured into a process, kind of a linear process, you know, one factor leads to another, leads to another, leads to another, and ultimately results in this core. Okay, so these are 2 different ways. I mean, two on a high level, 2 different ways of thinking. You break down the thing into what it is, or you think about the causality, like what makes it come about. And within each of these 2, you have 2 more ways of thinking about that. Any questions? Okay, so let's look at an example. Another example. I'm going to take this one. How can the retailer increase sales of televisions? So remember, we have 2 cores here: increase sales and televisions. So if we were, now I really want you to participate. If we were to apply component thinking, right? Let's see, first of all, where we could apply it. So could we apply component thinking to televisions? So if we were to do that, basically what it would mean is we would break down a television into its components, the screen, the whatever, remote control, the whatever. And then we would basically be saying, how can the retailer increase the sales of screens, of remote controls, etc.? And then you realize, yeah, no, that doesn't make sense, because that's not how TVs are sold. They're not sold in parts. They're sold whole. So it doesn't make sense. Could we apply component thinking to sales? So the answer is yes, we could. What could be a way that we could sort of apply component thinking to sales? So in other words, what could be a way that we break down sales into components of sales? Any ideas? It's something, by the way, that you sometimes see in annual reports. The segments that we sell to. Okay, so that's interesting. But now, Ines, what actually what you would be breaking down is, yeah, I mean, yeah, it could be the segments that we sell to, it could be, but actually what you're really breaking down in this case is the customers, which are in the question, but implicit. So it's not wrong what you're saying. It's not wrong. It's just that actually the core you would be breaking down is not so much sales per se, but more the customer. So how can we sell more to these kinds of people, these kinds of people, these kinds of people? Yeah, you could argue you're also breaking down sales. Yeah, maybe. But okay. So again, I like your thinking, huh? But if we were to focus exclusively on sales, what could be another way we could think about that? What could be a way that sales breaks down if you don't think about who the sales go to, I guess? So what you're talking about, Romain, is this is a very different kind of technique. It's a mathematical technique, and that's something we're going to explore later, but it's not this. When the sales are made. Okay, you could break it down into when they're made. You could. So morning, afternoon, or weekday, weekend. We could. Geography. Yes. So if it's a retailer that has multiple stores, yes, we could do it like that. So sales from whatever, you know, in the east, in the north, in the west, right? Or by country, yes. Any other ways we could think about this? I'll give you one more, right? So the one in the example that I have here is actually by channel. By channel. So then in the example, it would be how can we increase in-store sales, web store sales, and sales through other online channels like Amazon, right? But so interesting, right? Just thinking in terms of components already, you guys came up with a whole bunch of different ways that we could execute component thinking on this question. Okay, now let's talk about segmentation. Let's move to segmentation. If we focus on televisions, are there some ways that we could segment televisions? I mean, the answer is yes. So what could be some ways that we could segment televisions? Okay, so we could do it by price level, by size, by technology. Good, very good. By brand, very good, excellent, super, awesome, right? Okay, so yes. So, I mean, again, in the example, I just have it by size, but there's all sorts of options that we could do it. Yeah? Okay, now, let's move on to drivers. So the drivers of a television, I think that concept doesn't make sense. You know, here are the factors that explain the television. That doesn't make sense. So, but the drivers of sales, that is a concept that makes sense. Any idea what that could be? And I'll give you a hint here. There's a little bit of a cheat by customer type. So that would be segmenting customers again. So again, so here, before we move on to drivers, in this, if we go back to segmentation, remember, how can retailer increase sales of televisions? Remember that we can actually add the implicit part of the question. So how can the retailer increase sales of televisions to customers? And then we can segment the customers. So, all right, let me look at the answers you have. Marketing, price, availability. Okay, Alexis, you're definitely onto it. Purpose of buying a TV. So indeed, you could break it down by purpose of buying a TV. The problem is, yeah, you could do that. You could. It might be difficult to execute, but you could. Online versus in store. I think that's a channel, so that's not a driver of sales, right? But there we go. So Alexis, you know, Alexis mentioned marketing, price, availability. Somebody else mentioned promotion. When we put all that together, what is that? What is that actually? Have you guys taken a marketing? Yeah, bingo. That's it. That's it, Alukpe. It's the 4 Ps of marketing. So guys, look, I told you at the very beginning of the session, you know, I'm really not a big fan of you learning and memorizing frameworks because I'm really not. But if there is one framework that is really, really, really helpful to know, it's this one, 4 Ps, the 4 Ps of marketing. It is one of the most useful frameworks in business. So you might as well know it. Is it perfect? No, it's incomplete because sometimes there are other things that help explain sales or the lack of sales that are not covered by the 4 Ps. So for example, sales effectiveness. But fundamentally, 4 Ps, yeah, that's what it aims to do. It helps to explain why a product or a service is successful at selling or not successful at selling. Okay, and if you want to improve it, then you can act on the 4 Ps. So this is what I have in the example. So the marketing 4 Ps, and so then it would, you know, look like this. How can we improve the portfolio of TVs on offer, improve the pricing of the TVs, improve the promotion of the TVs, and then ensure sufficient availability of TVs, right? We don't want that. We don't want to run out of stock. This is the whole place bit. The whole place bit is about customers being able to put their hands on the product. So in this case, it's largely about stock availability. Okay. All right. Now let's move on to process thinking. So the process here would be the process that kind of leads to to the desired outcome, right? So here I'll give you a hint. It might help to just think of the full question. So what could be a way that we could think about this? Think about this as a linear process. So here, if we imagine the end outcome, it's a sale of a TV, right? And the sale happens when basically on the payment terminal, you see that the person's credit card has been approved. Then the sale is done. The different steps that lead to a sale. That's right. So how could you structure the different steps that lead to a sale? What could that be? Whose steps? I mean, at the end of the day, who does it? No, who made the process of sales, marketing, awareness? Yeah, you're on to something. Yeah, you're onto something, but you're thinking still a little bit too much in terms of lists rather than a process. Here's one way you can think about it. One way you can think about it is by following the buyer's journey, right? And the buyer, basically, their starting point is usually they don't even know that there's this opportunity. And the end point is their credit card got approved. And then the buyer goes through a whole series of steps, which is, oh, they find out there's an opportunity, oh, there's some TVs for, and then they kind of consider this opportunity, and then they get interested, and then their interest translates into a buying intent, and then the buying intent ultimately translates into an actual purchase. So you can think about, these are the steps that like a buyer goes through. It's usually in their minds. And so then the question becomes, how can the retailer increase success at each step? So this is also called the marketing funnel, but honestly, you don't need to know the marketing funnel. You really don't. You can just come up with your own marketing funnel, as long as it's more or less okay, it's totally fine, right? So here, how can we maximize customer awareness? How can we maximize interest and desire? How can we maximize conversion of desire into buying intent and maximize the conversion of intent into purchase? There's only one logic here. The logic is we're following the journey of the customer. Okay. So could be a way of thinking about it. So 4 different ways of looking at the problem. But for some of them, for example, segmentation, within that, there's like, loads and loads of different ways we could segment. And there's even different words we could segment. We could segment sales, we could segment televisions, we could segment customers. So in the end, we could come up with like 20 different structures here. Right? If you're in the case interview, actually, what will make the interviewer go nuts in a good way is you tell the interviewer, oh, I think I can think of a couple of ways we could think about this. We could kind of take a segmentation approach and segment, televisions, for example, by size or by technology, or we could think about it more from the perspective of the buyer and just kind of think about, you know, the buyer journey and structure our approach along the buyer journey. Given everything that you've told me, I think I prefer this, you know, the approach of segmenting, of following the buyer journey for these and these reasons. So here's my proposed structure. Right? So not only you actually come up with the structure, but actually you came up with like a couple of different ways of thinking about it, and ultimately you chose one, you know, that you prefer. Any questions about this? So I know this is a lot. Let me just say a couple of things. So the first thing is I showed you a couple of examples where we can find a way for, you know, a method, not a method, like a way of doing a breakdown for each of the 4 angles. But there are some questions where you can't find a structure for all 4 angles. Just be clear about that. Yeah. So don't worry if you can't come up with all 4. Second, yes, I know it's a lot. My suggestion is first familiarize yourself with one angle, one way of thinking, so kind of component thinking, and then just do drills with that, you know, spend time with that way of thinking until you really become comfortable with it, and then move on to the next one, and so on. Rather than trying to master all 4 at the same time, master one at a time. In the slides, you will see, for example, here you'll see 4 different questions and structures all along the component thinking. And then you'll see the same thing, 4 different questions, structures along the segmentation thinking, etc. Right? But really, my recommendation is just try to master one of these angles at a time rather than everything at the same time. Okay? All right. Any other questions on this? If and when you get to a place where you've mastered all 4 of these angles, you will become very, very powerful, very powerful. Yeah. But notice how all this hinges on the, you know, on this thing that Laure talked about before that she called logic, but which I call dimension. But basically, if we want to execute this right, we need to have one clear dimension by which we're doing the breakdown, right? There's in some of the stuff in the chat box here when we were talking about process, I think it looks more like lists that you were coming up that probably were made up of more than one dimension. So this is where you want to apply some real rigor in the thinking and just really stick to one dimension. Yeah. Okay. Now, I told you there's a 5th technique that we can apply. It's a very simple technique. This one comes from the guys at Crafting Cases. It's a very simple technique. It's not very powerful, but it's not, if you get stuck, it's nice to use it, or it's nice to use in a lower priority part of your question tree. So this technique is called opposite words. The idea is you break something down into 2 parts that are kind of opposite, but at the same time complementary. So kind of yin and yang. Yeah. So example concepts, supply demand, internal, external, existing versus new, etc. So if we go back to the sales of televisions example, and we focus on increased sales, then it could look like this. How can we increase sales through marketing actions, and how can we increase sales through non-marketing actions? Again, not super insightful, but if you're completely stuck, then you know that can be a good thing to default back to. Okay. Now, last point I will make about this. When you're building a full structure, you're actually breaking down more than one question. You're breaking down the main question, so the case question, but then, you know, when you come up with your level 1, normally your level 1 is made up of questions again. And if you want to take those further down, you can break them down again. So you're breaking down more than not just the case question, but also the level 1 questions. And so each time that you're breaking down one of these questions, you have the full toolkit available to you. So in a full structure, you might actually use a collection of different techniques. Let me just use another example. If we use the how can we improve the quality of university recruits, and I focus on university recruits, one way that I could think about this is to think about the journey of the university recruit, right? So what does the recruit do? The first thing that they do is they apply to the company. So they basically knock on the door and say, I'm interested. Then they get evaluated. And afterwards, well, they consider their offer. And lastly, if they join, then there might be another step in terms of their quality being improved. I'm going to skip the part about considering the offer, although that's actually, maybe I should have included it. So I'm following the recruit's journey here. So how can we improve the quality of applicants? How can we improve our selection methods? And how can we improve the new recruits before they start to work? Okay. Now, the quality of applicants, if I focus on applicants, I could use segmentation. And then there's a million ways that I could segment applicants, gender, type of program, etc. In this case, I've just segmented them by the type of school that they come from. So either schools where we already recruit or schools where we don't recruit yet. Now, the selection method, you can break it down into its components. So selection method usually involves some kind of a process, whatever, you know, CV review, interview, blah, 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 blah. Some criteria of evaluation and the people who execute all of that. So how can we improve our process? How can we improve or adjust our criteria? How can we improve our recruiters? And then lastly, how can we improve the new recruits before they start to work? I could use opposite words and break it down like this. How can we improve them? By training them before their start date and by training them right after their start date, but before they start to really work. Okay. And so now you can see we have a structure, a full question tree, where we've actually used several of the techniques because we actually broke down more than one question. Okay. Any questions on that? No questions? Okay. So then what I'm going to do is I'm going to go now to something that, who was talking about this? I'm kind of scrolling through the chat box. It was, I can't find it anymore. But anyway, it doesn't matter. Sometimes the how-to question that we're trying to solve is a quantitative question, meaning how can we make this number better? Usually either bigger or smaller, yeah? How can you increase profits? How can you get more customers? How can you reduce cost? How can you, improve the retention rate? Blah, blah. We're just trying to make a number better. When that's the case, there is the option of treating the problem like a math problem. And that's cool. It's kind of sexy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the foundational technique, and then a very special application of that technique. Okay, so the foundational technique is something called a value driver tree. It is very popular in the world of consulting, private equity, investment banking, equity research, VC, basically any kind of profession where the people who do these professions really care about value, company values, for example, and they want like really robust ways of driving value. And so usually breaking things down in mathematical terms really helps. So I'm going to show you an example just to show you how it works. So let's say that the question is, we want to improve the profitability of our fitness app. Okay, so the core here is profitability, of course, and obviously we can start by increasing revenues and reducing cost. I'm putting a minus sign here just to make it explicit that we're really going mathematical here, okay? So increasing revenues, one of the ways that we can think about this, if you think about the revenues of the app, is the revenues is the number of users times the revenue per user. So I can make it like that, yeah? And the number of users of our app, one way to think about this is the number of people who have our app installed times the percent who actually use the app, okay? And the number of people who have our app installed is the number of people who have any app, fitness app installed, times the percent who have our app, okay? And I can just continue to just break things down in the same way. And I end up with what's called a value driver tree. So let me make a couple comments about this. First, I want to be very clear. In a case interview, no one would ever expect you to build something that is so detailed. I just wanted to show you what it could look like. But in a real life case, like, you know, something that you work on for 3 months, yes, you should come up with something detailed like this, but during a case interview, no way. Now, what is cool about this? So what you see is there's 11 boxes that are kind of like, or actually 12 boxes that are kind of like at the tail end on the right-hand side. So there's 7 green ones and 5 red. So they're kind of the, you know, the end of the path. And if I change the value, and if any of these boxes are on the end of the path, then basically it'll work its way back up to the beginning. All the way to, it'll change the profitability of the fitness app. That's cool, right? Now, not all of these boxes are things that the company necessarily has influence over, right? Number of people with any fitness app installed doesn't have much influence over, but it's still something worth monitoring because it is something that impacts the profitability of our fitness app, yeah? Now, what else is cool about this is that as long as the math is correct, so that you haven't made a mistake in doing the breakdown, then it's guaranteed to be MECE. And that's for a very simple reason, is that basically, like, correct math is always MECE. Okay, there's deeper reasons for this, but fundamentally, you need to trust this. Correct math is always MECE. Okay. But the key here, in order not to make mistakes, is to keep track of units. So meaning whether it's grams or kilograms or cubic centimeters or whatever, liters, whatever it is, just keep track, dollars, keep track of the units at every step. If you don't, this is where the mistakes occur and then the whole thing falls apart. Yeah. So in fact, the help desk example that we've been looking at many times, this was a value driver tree the whole time. I just never showed you the signs. Now I am showing them to you, but it was a value driver tree the whole time. Okay, so again, when the math is correct, then the structure is logically tight. It might not be a good reflection of how the world works, but it's at least logically tight. Yeah. Any questions about value driver trees? Okay, so now let me show you the special application, because that one is like uber powerful. So if you look at this driver tree, you'll see that there's like 2 types of operations. There's plus and minus. It's basically the same thing. They're kind of brother, sister of each other. And then there's multiplication division, which is a different type of operation. When you build a value driver tree out of multiplication and division, it is incredibly powerful because it gives you insight really, really quickly. It's super robust. And it's amazing. And it's the technique for market sizing. Okay, so let me show you. So this technique to building a value driver tree out of multiplication and division is called factoring. I'm going to show you how factoring works. Okay, it's a bit like it requires concentration to kind of understand it and ultimately to be able to do it. But once you get the hang of it, again, it just flows like water out of the tap. So let's say that I'm going to show you through an example. So let's say that the question is, how can we decrease the labor costs in the call center? And here we're going to think of a call center just like a help desk call center. So not a call center that does sales, not a call center that calls people, but a call center that receives calls, usually because people need a problem solved. Okay? So the way that factoring works is, remember, all this is a very quantitative exercise, yeah? So what you want to do is you want to think, you want to start with the core in the question. So here's basically decrease labor cost, yeah? Or labor cost. And you want to think about a direct quantitative value driver, which we're going to call X. So really something that has a direct impact on labor cost, which we're going to call X. And what we're going to do is we're going to multiply or divide by X over X and then rearrange. And it's through this rearranging that we're going to create insight. So let me get concrete. If you think about a direct driver of the labor costs in the call center, like something really very close to it, it would be the number of hours that are worked in the call center. The more people work, the more we need to pay them. The less they work, the less we need to pay them. Okay? So direct value driver is the number of hours worked. So this is equal to hours times labor cost divided by hour. All right? So basically, how to decrease hours times how to decrease the labor cost per hour, which is basically the wage rate. So you see what we've done is we introduced a driver, hours, and that helped us to extract another driver, the wage rate. So we get a lot of insight. All right, if I continue, what a direct driver of the number of hours, how much our people need to work, is basically how many calls we get. If nobody calls, they don't need to work. If a lot of people call, then we need to work a lot. So number of calls. So that is equal to number of calls times hours per call, which is basically the call duration. So now is how can we decrease the number of calls, of incoming calls, and how can we decrease the call duration? Okay, again, very insightful. And lastly, the number of calls is probably driven by the number of clients that we have. So how to decrease the number of clients and how to decrease the calls per client, which is the call frequency. Now, probably some of you kind of notice, hold on, decreasing the number of clients, that doesn't feel right. That's right, it doesn't feel right. So mathematically, if we decrease the number of clients, then we will have less calls, which means we'll have to work less, which means we'll reduce our cost. But that's not very good business to decrease the number of clients, right? So we don't want to do that. So again, it works mathematically, but in terms of like good business thinking, business acumen, that's a terrible idea. So we don't want to do that, but still we can think about the other bit, which is decreasing the number of calls per client. That is something we can certainly think about, yeah? So what we're left with here, if we basically scrap or decide not to touch the number of clients, we're left with how to decrease calls per client, so call frequency, how to decrease call duration, how much time we spend on the phone each time somebody calls, and how to decrease the wage rate. These are the three actionable drivers to reduce the call center, the labor costs in the call center. Any questions on how factoring works? Okay, let me show you an example with market sizing, because this is really the technique that you want to use for market sizing. It's exactly the same technique, this factoring technique. So let's say that we're going to try to figure out the number of gas stations in Spain or whatever country, who cares what the country is. So what we want to do is we want to think of a direct driver that impacts the number of gas stations. And probably one of the most direct ones, if the number of gas stations is the supply, then basically the demand, and so it's the demand for fuel liters, right? So fuel liters. So now here, actually, let me try to show you this. It might be difficult to conceptualize, so I'm going to just show it to you visually. So if I have gas number of stations, right? And but the thing that I introduced was fuel liters. Oops. So that is the driver that I've just introduced. Now, so technically what I would do, I would basically now get fuel liters times stations per liter, right? Multiplied by X over X, and I rearrange. But now the concept of station per liter, that just feels really weird. Station per liter, you know, you think about stations per liter. What? The concept, however, of liter per station, that does make sense. How many stations are sold per, how many liters are sold per station? That makes sense. So what we're doing is we're flipping the fraction here. So if we're flipping the fraction, what we need to do here is we need to basically divide, no longer multiply, because right, that's the flip of the operation. So we're going to have divide, and so it's still fuel liters, right? So fuel liters divided by liter per station. That makes sense. So that's what we have on the slide. Okay, so we have fuel liters bought per year divided by liters sold per station per year. Now, what drives the number of fuel liters bought per year? Probably the number of cars out there. So that's equal to number of cars times liters per car per year. And what drives the number of cars? Probably the number of people in the country. Whoops. So number of people times the number of cars per person. What drives the liters of fuel per car per year? Probably how much they're driven, so kilometers. So we get kilometers per car times liters per kilometer. So kilometers per car is how much they're driven. Liters per kilometer is basically some notion of fuel efficiency. Now, liters sold per station, that one you might wonder, okay, how do I think about this? And like, I think a nice immediate driver to think about is the number of pumps at that station. The more pumps, the more liters they can sell, assuming there's enough traffic out there. So number of pumps. So liters sold per station equals number of pumps per station times liters per pump. The number, and then the number of liters per pump is going to be a function of how many tank fills are done. So tank fills per pump times liters per tank fill. And now we have our structure for the market sizing. Now we only have to do two things. First thing is fill in the numbers for all these boxes that are at the end of the path. So number of people, number of cars per person, numbers of kilometers per car per year, right? So all this, we basically make reasonable assumptions. And then the last step is you do all the calculation so that you finally get an estimate for the number of gas stations in Spain. Yeah. So what's really important here, or really like valuable, is to really do this in the right order. So really, first, come up with your structure, basically the value driver tree by factoring. Second, come up with the estimates. And third, calculate. When you do this, you get two benefits. The first is that you reduce the chance of mistakes because you're not trying to do three different things at the same time. The first bit is really about thinking, breaking down a problem. The second is about using your business judgment and your knowledge of the world to come up with estimates. And third is, again, thinking, but now you're just calculating. So it's 3 different activities, just focus on one at a time. The second benefit of doing it like this is that you show that in your method of working, you are structured and organized rather than chaotic and trying to multitask. Multitasking is not a great thing. Solo tasking, focus tasking, to do whatever you do well, that is a much, it's much safer. If you want to learn more about how to do market sizing, I think the guys at Crafting Cases have a full course on this, which is very good. And I'm not getting any commission for this. But what I've shown you is enough. It's enough. All the rest that they show you is just kind of like benefits, bonus. So if you want to become experts at market sizing, great, take their course. But if you just want to master the fundamentals, this is enough. Any questions on that? So this is, I'll repeat what I said before about kind of like, how to master all this. I know I'm throwing a lot of stuff at you at quite a rapid pace, so probably you're starting to get a little bit overwhelmed, which I totally get, right? But it doesn't mean that it doesn't mean that you're dumb or whatever. It's just I'm just throwing things at you quite quickly. But you absolutely can get to a point where you master all this. Again, it's all about taking one sort of technique at a time and spending enough time with that technique until you master it. It's a little bit like, I don't know, tennis. So you're going to work on your forehand for a while until you're really good with that. Then you're going to work on your backhand. Then you're going to work on your serve, and so on and so forth. One skill at a time. Okay. My experience with this one is that, like with the factoring and value driver trees in general, is that the improvement curve kind of looks like this. Basically, you don't improve, you don't improve, you don't improve, and then all of a sudden it kind of clicks, and then you improve very quickly. Okay, let me ask again. Any other questions on this? I used to ask a question about how many delivery men in Paris, how to solve that. Same thing. It's going to be the same thing. So again, delivery men, depends delivery men of what. But let's say it's delivery men for people who deliver whatever, Uber Eats types of meals or whatever, right? Who cares? But let's just say it's that. Then the first breakdown would be, what would be the driver of the number? An immediate driver of the number of delivery men would be the number of meals that are ordered. So number of meals times meals delivered per delivery person, right? And then the number of meals. You can, again, what's the direct driver of the number of meals? Blah, blah. And there you could probably go like, it's the number of the total number of meals that are eaten times the percent of those that are delivery meals. And then the total number of meals that are eaten is the total number of people times the number of meals per day per people, or per year per person, and so on and so forth. But exactly the same approach. Okay, good. Any other questions on this? Okay, this is what we'd call a guesstimate. Well, the guesstimate will be the guesstimates are the numbers that you're going to come up with for the estimates here. So number of people, right? We're talking about Spain. So your guesstimate is going to be 40 million. Number of cars per person, your guesstimate will be, I don't know, 1. Kilometers per car per year, your guesstimate will be 10,000. That's the guesstimate. Should you practice those in isolation? Don't understand the question. I don't know what those is. I'm not sure what isolation means. It's usually easier to explain yourself orally rather than math part separate from the case. Yes. So that's also what indeed, this I talked about last time, right? Overall, the way that you want to think about your case preparation is by doing a combination of full case practice and drills. So you're going to want to do both, but definitely you're going to want to do these kinds of drills, just kind of like market sizing. Just do whatever. Do 45 minutes of market sizing until your brain is mush, and then whatever, go have a beer. Yeah. But yeah, definitely. Okay. Let's spend 5 minutes on the following question before we move on to the options questions. Hold on. And what I want you to do is, yeah, okay, hold on, let me just erase all of this. All right, so the question is this: how can HEC increase the, how can HEC increase revenues from alumni donations? So what I'd like you to do is I want you to don't give me a full structure, but more ways of thinking about this. So here, I'll just put all the techniques that we've covered so far. We learned component thinking, segmentation, driver thinking, process thinking, opposite words, and let's say factoring, which is a special case of value driver tree. So just give me an example of what it could look like for, for any one of these. What could it look like? Oh, by the way, I will highlight. So factoring equals, yes, exactly, good, right? So number of alumni, exactly like Vanessa, exactly like Vanessa says. So number of alum times dollars per alum. And then, you know, we can continue on and on, but that would be a way that we could start. Good. What else? How else could we do this? How else could we think about this? Let's start easy. If we were to think segmentation, how could we think about that? What could be some example? What could we segment? Here, let's go back to the thing, right? So the core words we have, that's one core word. I'm just going to make it a different color. And we have another core, another core word here. Let's make that maybe green. And then we have another core word here. Let me make that whatever, purple. So, so analyze the various steps of the donations process to see where we could work on. Okay, so you're thinking your process thinking. Good. So we could indeed follow the steps of the donation process. Yeah, that's one way we could do it. So the donation process, again, would have to be a bit clear what we mean by the donation process, but yeah. What else? How else could we think about this? The types of donations. Okay, well, okay, lots of ideas all of a sudden. Okay, good. So that would be kind of, so this is either, let's say it's probably a segmentation of donations. And then indeed, it would be, so indeed, like it could be subscriptions, one time, blah, 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 right? So that could be definitely one way that we could look at this. Good. Segment, what types of revenues from donations? Okay, so segmentations, we could segment alumni, for example, by program. How else could we segment alumni, by the way? Good, by graduation year, by YOG. How else could we segment them? Demographics, yes. Geography, good. Let me give you some really silly ones that make no business sense, but we could. By height, by, first letter of last name. Okay, these are like totally ridiculous, but we could do it like that. Okay, occupation, yes. So we could segment, there's a million ways we could segment them, and many of them that actually make sense, right? Some are obviously stupid, but some make sense. Good. How else? So besides segmentation, hold on. Let me just make this a little bit smaller now because it's kind of invading our space. Okay. I saw something else. Okay, how else could we think about this? Components, any way that we could think about this in terms of components? Yeah, so the component of if you break down donations by component or segment, it becomes a little bit hard to tell what is what. But definitely you could break down component by donation, donations into components. And so again, it could be, for example, another way of thinking about this could be like, what is kind of like, what is the end purpose of the donation? So does it go to a general fund? Is it for a specific, does it have a specific purpose, right? Like for a chair or for a new building or something like this or whatever. So you could do it basically by donation by purpose, right? That could be something. Okay. Oops. Hold on. Just trying to. Okay. Any other ideas about what we could do? Driver. Any thoughts about how we could think about this in terms of drivers? That one is a little bit harder, but there is a way we could do this. So here, when are donations made? Okay, so yeah, so that could be another form of either component or segmentation of sales. Yes, that's right, but that's not drivers. Here, let me give you an example of driver. So driver, we could apply driver thinking to alumni or donations, I guess, or it's, yeah, the driver of donation. No, driver of donations. There we go. You're onto something, Kenza. You're onto something. So now the emotional connection to HSA is just one driver, but we want to be thinking about what is kind of like the full set. And so what we're talking about here is the drivers of behavior. Yeah, the drivers of behavior. And basically, if you think about how detectives do their work, when they don't know who committed a crime, basically they always ask two questions: who had motive and who had the opportunity, right? So basically, they think about it in terms of motivation or motive and ability. And these are the two sort of fundamental dimensions that help explain all human behavior. So if you want to change human behavior, you just need to ask yourself, how do I change these axes? If you want people to behave differently, work on their motivation and work on their ability. So here, the motivations to donate indeed could be something kind of like the recognition they get, their emotional connection to HSA, blah, blah. There's a whole bunch of things you could think about. And then the ability It could be something very short term, which is, for example, making payments very easy. Yeah, whatever. So I don't know, like, you know, you have 5 ways you can pay with credit card, via Revolut, via blah, blah, you know, so making the payment easy. But then on a deeper level, you can also think about how to help the alumni earn bigger income so that they have more disposable income to give to the school. So help them get jobs, you know, prepare them better for the future, those kinds of things. Okay. So anyway, so the point that I wanted to make is the following. Again, we took this question and look, I mean, you came up with so many different ways to think about this. Okay. And it really just becomes kind of now it's juggling, playing with the concept, playing with the idea of structuring. Okay. I'm just conscious of time and I need to take you through the last bit, the options questions. Thankfully, those are so much easier. So let me just first be clear what the heck options questions are. So options question is a question that asks us to decide, to choose between options. So the options questions, they come in 3 levels of complexity. But the good news is that regardless of the level of complexity, the way to think about them doesn't change. But I think it's helpful to recognize what are the 3 levels of complexity. So the simplest form of an options question is a yes or no question, a should we question. Should we enter Poland? Yes, no. The next level of complexity is when you have to choose one, you have to choose one option out of 2 or more. So should we enter Poland, Czech, or Hungary? By the way, these are commercial questions. They're market entry questions. They're not military questions. Yeah. Okay. And then the third level of complexity is when you have to choose a few out of an even bigger set. So which 5 EU countries should we enter? Okay. So now, again, it helps to think about what an answer to this looks like. And the answer to this, because the answer is going to guide the way we think. The answer to these questions is going to be, you know, choose these options, fine, because of these and these, reasons. Remember before, when we were looking at how-to questions, what was driving our thinking was actions. And so we wanted to come up with structures that gave us the types of actions. But now we're looking at structure. We're looking at a question whose answers is based on reasons. And the reason, what are reasons? When you give me the 5 reasons that I should do X, these reasons, what they do is they're actually reflections of the criteria that you used to evaluate. So the way we're going to want to think about this is in terms of decision criteria. Okay. If there's one thing you remember about options questions is you want to think about it in terms of decision criteria. Now, we already looked at an options question before, this one. And as you can see, each one of these questions reflects a certain kind of criterion. Okay, so what I want to do is I want to show you something really cool now. Yeah, there we go. I want to work very quickly through 3 problems with you. First problem, should Emirates acquire Etihad? What I would just want from you is give me a few questions that you think maybe we should try to solve in order to figure out whether Emirates should acquire Etihad. What is the goal? Well, you know, that's kind of for you to tell me what the goal is. You can't ask the client what the goal is. Actually, the client says, "Hey, we're thinking about it," and then you need to tell them if they have good reasons. So be careful. But to determine, we need some metrics. Okay, well, you tell me what the metrics are. Okay, so do they have the capital? Good. Okay, so do we have enough money to buy? Good. Enough money, enough financing, etc. Good. Okay. What else? What else comes to mind? Can Emirates increase the value? Okay, so can they increase the value of Etihad? Good. Let me just kind of put that here. Are there potential synergies? Good. So there's like, are there financial synergies? And then I'm even going to say, are there kind of qualitative synergies? Good. What about risk? Just can you elaborate a little bit on the risk question? Elaborate a little bit on the risk question. Meanwhile, anybody just feel free to share. How difficult? Okay, good. How difficult is it to merge? How difficult to merge? Very good, right? And especially in airlines, like especially the whole human side of mergers, you know, especially flight attendants and pilots is very difficult. Does it align with their strategy? Very good, excellent. Align with strategy / business model. Very good, excellent. Is it feasible? Okay, you know, regulatory approval. Good. You know, can we get that? Probably what it means here is, you know, you have the two sheikhs who drink tea and decide together. But yes, can we manage the complexity risks, right? Etc. Right? And let me just give you one more. You know, are there better options? Okay, let's work on a different problem. Let's say Toyota wants to increase sales in East Africa. That's the context. And the question is, should they build a manufacturing plant in Rwanda? All right. What questions should they be thinking about? Okay, so is it feasible? Yeah, okay. Okay. So how much will it so hold on, how much will it so hold on. So right, okay, so is Rwanda the best location? Right? Do they have can they get the rights? Yeah, can they get the rights to do that? Regulatory permits, etc. Right? What else? Do they have the rights? Let's see, what am I seeing? Is the customer base interested? So why, I guess if the customer base is interested, why would they be interested? It basically is like ultimately the question is, you could say, is will it help to increase sales? Yeah, will it increase sales in East Africa, right? Can we find, okay, local talent, right? Can we find enough local talent? Good, because that's obviously something super important. Can they buy a plant instead? Buy instead. Good one. Does it have strategic financial sense? So strategic sense, you could say, you know, will it help? We just want to try to be a bit more specific, but will it help build, you know, Toyota's reputation or brand reputation in East Africa? Good. Build brand, whoops. Brand reputation. Okay. And is Rwanda the best option? Yeah. Is there option M&A or organic growth? Yeah, that's buy instead. What about, you know, can we manage the political risks? Can we manage the currency risks? Okay, good. All right. Yeah, will it be basically, will it be profitable basically to do this, right? Okay, last question. Your cousin, not mine, your cousin is thinking or is wondering whether to do an MBA. Should they? So they've come to you and they're like, hey, I'm wondering if I should do an MBA. What do you think? So what you're going to do is you're not going to tell them if they should do an MBA, of course, because great leaders don't tell people what to do. Great leaders ask the right questions. So what are the questions that you think that your cousin should be asking themselves? So do you have the funds? Have the money to pay for it? Good. What else? What's his end goal? Yeah, okay, but try to change that. I would say, will it help to achieve the end goal? Yeah. Okay. Yes, exactly. Do we already have? Do you have? Okay. Do you have enough experience to get in, basically? Right. Good. What else? Do you have the qualifications? Good. Yes. What else? What else? How about? Is it a good return on investment? Good ROI? What else do you have? Do you have time for it? Nice one. Good. What are you thinking? Where are you thinking of applying to? I'm not sure why that matters. Try to figure out the underlying question that matters here. Is it, I should say that, not sure that matters either. Are there better, okay, are there better programs? Better programs meaning, e.g. like a MIM, right? Whoops. Can you relocate? Are you able to relocate? And then, I don't know, let's say your cousin is married. Can you manage risks to family? Because either family comes with and then they get dislocated, or they don't come with and then you get separated. So there's risks, right? Okay, let me stop here. Opportunity costs, very good, right? What are the opportunity costs? Good. So do you guys see the pattern here? Anybody see any pattern? I will give you a bit of a hint. Any pattern? Okay, so the pattern is this. I think you can probably see it, right? One type of criterion that you've been thinking about is kind of financially, is it a good idea? That's at the top. The next kind of criteria you've been thinking is qualitatively, is it a good idea? So does it fit with strategy? Will it help to achieve the end goal? Blah, blah. Another type of criterion you've been thinking about is feasibility. Fourth is risk management, exactly. And fifth is, are there better alternatives, options? That's exactly it. That's it. Yeah, exactly. You got it, right? So let me just show you. If we go back to the PowerPoint, then basically these criteria, these 5 buckets of criteria, these 5 classes of criteria are 5 classes of criteria that, like, people are extremely intuitive. People always think in those terms. And if you structure things in those terms, it will always resonate, because this is how people think. And the beauty is that, like, these 5 classes of criteria cover all possible criteria that you could ever think about. Yeah. And in fact, this doesn't even limit itself to business decisions. It's also kind of like, I don't know, if you're wondering whether to order in tonight instead of cooking, you're going to be probably thinking about these dimensions, right? Economic benefits is like, okay, is it worth the money? Strategic benefit is kind of, does it help me to save time? Or maybe I can actually get something much tastier than when I cook myself. Is it feasible? It depends. If it's Friday night and it's 11 p.m., maybe not. Blah, blah. You're going to be thinking about along those terms. right? So the point is, I know it kind of looks like a framework, and it is, and I admit it's a framework, but I guess it has such universal value that it's actually just worth knowing it. But the thing is, you already know it. But it's a good place to just good place to start to ensure that like you've kind of covered all your bases. Now, it's just a starting point, right? At the end of the day, you're always going to want to tailor things to the specific case, which means that you're going to want to always be very specific. So avoid framing things in generic terms, like can we manage the risks? That means nothing, right? So be specific. Take your structure down to the second level. That's where it really becomes meaningful, right? But also be flexible. Don't hesitate to focus on the most important criteria and then just kind of ignore the less important ones, right? Don't be afraid to combine less important criteria into one bigger criterion and to disaggregate a big one into smaller parts. Don't be afraid to reorder things in the right way, right? So there's all sorts of tailoring that you can do. And in fact, you should do it so that it actually fits the case and it feels like it really, resonates. Yeah. And then here's the thing. When the question, so we were just looking at yes, no questions, but when the question becomes more complex, like this, the thinking is exactly the same. All you need to do now, you have a whole bunch of options, and all you need to do is compare these options according to the criteria. And in fact, the fifth class of criteria, opportunity cost, or the alternatives, you don't even need to consider because they are already built into the question. Okay. So that's that. So this is the classical way of thinking about criteria. This is a classical way. Now, different types of problems, you can come up with your kind of own framework. So if you actually go on the blogosphere and you say, framework for M&A, right? You'll see Victor Cheng has a framework for M&A, Management Consulted has their own framework for M&A. Everybody has their own framework for M&A. They're more or less the same. But fundamentally, those M&A frameworks all come from this foundation. So you don't need to learn the M&A framework. You just need to know this foundation and then just come up with your own framework, really. So very last point, there's a second way of reorganizing these techniques, a second way of organizing, these criteria that I want to share with you very quickly for product-focused cases. And let me just explain it to you very, very quickly. And it all comes from the fundamental belief that a great product is a product that solves a problem for its customers. If it doesn't, then it's not a great product. And the technology might be great, it might look beautiful, but it's not great until it solves a problem for a customer in a sustainable way. So if you have a product-focused problem, then one way that you might start the thinking about this is, will customers be interested in this, or does it actually solve a real problem for customers? Yeah. And if you're going to start thinking about the customer, then the next thing that you might actually think about is the competitors. Can we compete with this product? Third thing you might thinking about is the company. Can we make profit with this product? Right? And you've probably recognized the 3 C's, which is not really a framework, it's just a way of organizing things. But you start with the 3 C's and then add in any additional stakeholders that might be relevant for this case. That could be regulators, suppliers, channels, like, business partners, retailers, whatever, right? Employees, shareholders, who knows? Add in any others that are relevant for this particular case. You'll always need those 3: customer, competition, company, and then you can add others. And the point is, this is just a different way of organizing criteria. But at the end of the day, if you were to make a mapping game, everything that you come up with here would ultimately map to what's here. It's just a different way of organizing and framing. Okay, so these are the 2 main ways that are helpful, I think, to think about criteria, either the classical way or from the stakeholder perspective, who's playing the game of business and starting with the 3 C's. Okay, so we're basically almost done. So we covered a lot of ground today, a lot, right? I shared with you a lot of techniques, right? I told you already, like, it's a lot to take in, but you can get to a place where you master this if you kind of spend time with one technique at a time, familiarize yourself, you know, do drills, do practice until you're kind of like, okay, I got you, I get it, right? And then move on to the next one, and then move on to the next one, and so on and so forth. What if we go back to the 5+4 method that we've talked about, then what it kind of comes down to is the following, right? So again, ensure that you're 100% clear about the case question. Then assess, is the question how to or options question? If it's an options question, choose between the 5 classical criteria or the stakeholder criteria, the 3 C's plus, usually for a product focused game case. If it's a how to, identify one of the cores in the question, choose one of the techniques, so one of the 4 angles or opposite words or factoring. And then if it's one of the 4 angles, choose the dimension by which you're going to break down, the logic by which you're going to break it down. Do the breakdown and then test it with a 3-part health check. Then how to communicate. We talked about this. Show your question tree, restate the question, executive summarize a number of things. And then when you're done presenting your structure, suggest where to start based on the highest impact. Yeah. So what I want to invite you to do, we're not going to do it now because we run out of time, but I think a kind of cool exercise to do is to go back to the Bain videos and look at these 3 women and then kind of try to critically assess their structures. First, you can see, you know, what kind of question is this? This is clearly an options question. There's a choice between 2 options, 3D with glasses or 3D without glasses. Yeah. Look and try to assess their structures. I'll give you a hint. 2 of them are very good, but for different reasons. Each one has something really good in it, but there's also something missing in it. And one of those structures is actually very poor. Yeah. Yeah, and then here's in this slide, I'll let you read it, but these are just some ideas about how you can just practice structuring in terms of drills, besides doing full cases. And that is pretty much what I had for you today. Any questions from any of you? Okay, I know it was a lot. So again, like if you're overwhelmed, I get it, but don't let that demoralize you, demotivate you. Yeah, it's completely normal because I gave you so much stuff, right? But you absolutely can get to a place where you master all of this if you take it one bit at a time. And let me tell you this, if you master all of this, it's not that like you're gonna, it's like maybe you know, maybe you'll be good enough to like to structure the case or pass the case. It's like you will completely rock the case if you master this, or at least rock the structuring part of the case if you master this. Like that's how far above the line it'll take you. Yeah. So this is not about achieving that minimum standard. This is about blowing past the standard. All right. So with that said, is it the same content you teach when there are consulting masterclasses that HEC Talents organizes? Should we come to those as well? I do classes for you guys. I do classes for the MBAs, but I don't think I do classes for HEC Talents per se. So I think it's not me. Anything else that I do, everything that I do is for very specific programs. So I'm not going to say you can't come to the MBA classes or the classes that I do for MBAs. That's not for me to say. But yes, actually, I show exactly the same content to the MBAs. Yeah, sorry, it's a very long way of answering your question, but yeah. So I guess no need to come to them unless you just want a refresher, and that's always nice to have. All right, everybody, then let me not hold you up any longer. Have a nice evening. Happy problem solving to everybody. I really hope that you get to enjoy your casing, that you find this fun, right? And the better you get, the more fun you will find it. And hopefully I see you in the new year in person for session 3. See you, everybody. Take care.